Culturecast. I'm your host, Luis Campos, alongside my co-hosts, Megan, Edward, and Olivia. Today we're going to be talking about the Italian film Cinema Paradiso. Megan, why don't you tell us a little about the historical context and the author of this film?
Yeah, sure. So Giuseppe Tornatore is the Italian film director and screenwriter for Cinema Paradiso, and he was born in Sicily. He began his career as a still photographer, and his love of film actually began when he was a stage director at age 16, and then he went on to TV directing in 1979 with Italy's national television network, RAI, and then movie directing and writing. So to provide some historical context for the film, it's important to note the destruction of many cities and families after the war, along with the creation of a new government that held the values of the many Italians disillusioned with the war. So after the defeat of Mussolini's fascist government, Italy was under the Christian democratic system, and as a result, Christianity was very popular in the culture, and Tornatore illustrated this in his films with a lot of Christian imagery. And these ideas meshed together with the already predominant Catholic culture in Italy, and these are very predominant themes in Cinema Paradiso. So Tornatore is also known for his films being considered very nostalgic, and he claims that they are designed to elicit substantial emotional responses in his viewers. And his films induce these responses because they illustrate the strong sense of tradition, family, community, and these types of things in cultures. And in addition, his films are also considered neo-realistic, and neo-realism began in Italy after the war as a response to the economic crisis and the political turmoil happening in the country after World War II. So neo-realism in filming focused on depicting the Italian life and the political ideals from World War II as realistically as possible, and it aimed to represent the changes in Italian culture and to highlight the poverty, oppression, injustice, and desperation that was occurring. And so Tornatore said that Italy's neo-realist films actually inspired him to pursue documentary filmmaking, and many of his films demonstrate this concept. And it's shown in Cinema Paradiso with the focus on movies to escape and forget the difficulties of post-World War II life. So communities would come together and try to entertain themselves as a way to not think about the war or all of their issues. And so Tornatore represented this close-knit community structure and the importance of family and Italian culture in his films. And this was important because the war even changed the structure of many families, because young men and husbands were sent away, leaving the women of the household to just fend for themselves. And so these values were really represented in Cinema Paradiso.
So yeah, that's a general understanding of what the author and the director and what the context of Italy was at the time. So Edward, why don't you give us a brief plot summary of Cinema Paradiso?
Sure. So there's a filmmaker, Toto, who lives in Rome and has not visited his hometown for 30 years. Hears the news of his old friend Alfredo's death. Alfredo was father figure for Toto and encouraged him to pursue his passions. The news of his death made him think about his nostalgic memories of his childhood at his hometown. The memories such as hanging out with Alfredo at the projector room, falling in love for the first time, and being the projectionist at the new Cinema Paradiso makes him go back to his hometown for the first time in 30 years. Through these, Toto has flashbacks and he relieves his upbringing and reminiscences on his past. Through the flashbacks, we learn about Toto's life and his different relationships with people in his town.
So yeah, given all of that information, let's move on to a little bit more deeper analysis of the film itself. So let's talk about the principal aesthetic elements of the film. So some of the principal aesthetic elements of the film really surround a basic style and sense of editing and filming. Tornatore does not really play around with a super complex set of camera angles and shots to make the film stand out in that matter. The beauty about Cinema Paradiso is the classic and simple approach to aesthetic that Tornatore takes with a lot of the shots and editing that he does throughout the film. There are very few instances in which he does do complex shots and cuts, and sometimes when they do occur, it feels kind of out of place when comparing it to the utter simplicity of the majority of the film. A scene that comes to mind is when Toto and Elena are eating salad in the field and running around. The chops that they take with the cactus are in sync with the cuts made in editing, so each slice represents a different cut and different angle that they take with the film. and it's pretty confusing to begin with because you're so used to such a simple approach to editing. It's kind of a palate refresher in a sense that it marks a new point in Toto's life in which he develops and fosters his love for Elena. So it does make sense to make quite a drastic change from like one point of his life to another. Another remarkable shot, in my opinion, was that when he's walking home from Elena's house after waiting outside of her house for New Year's, the majority of the shots in this film that involve movement and dialogue or movement of characters revolve around a camera moving along with the character's movement. So you see directly the steps that he takes and you're moving along with him. But with this specific shot, Tornatore just places a camera in the middle, at the end of the middle of the street, and just has Toto walk down, and you see all the plates and stuff flying out of the window because it's like tradition for them to do that in Italy for New Year's, and it's just quite a different shot from what we're used to. It's a return to simplicity, but the precedent that was set before is much different than what we're seeing in this shot. And yeah, so to kind of wrap it all up, a lot of the aesthetic of this film is just very simple, and it doesn't really involve much complex camera work. The beauty of Cinema Paradiso, again, is just the sheer simplicity of it all. So we're going to transition from the technical film aspects of the movie and look more into the symbols. So Megan, give us a little bit about the symbols in Cinema Paradiso.
Yeah, sure. So the film itself is a symbol for nostalgia because it shows various flashbacks of Toto in the 1940s and the 1950s, and it represents a time when the movies were the main focal point of entertainment. And the movie Cinema Paradiso actually includes real clips of old black and white movies in the film and other just old movie posters throughout it. But the main symbol throughout the whole film is the movie theater itself with the name Cinema Paradiso. And Paradiso means paradise. And this was the literal paradise of the town for the people in it because they were dealing with the effects of the war, and they would go to the movie theater as a place to escape and to feel better and to use each other as a community because they were going through such a tough time period. And at the end of the movie, another symbol was actually with the Cinema Paradiso as well. And it's towards the end, right after Alfredo dies, and the R in Paradiso has actually fallen off, and it reads Paradiso, which is an anagram for goodbye father, because Alfredo was a father figure for Toto. And then also towards the end of the film, it shows Toto's mother, her knitting starting to unravel as she runs to the door to go see who's there. And this shows the tension of her life unraveling as she sees her son for the first time in many, many years. And it also represents just certain things from the past coming apart, like Alfredo's death and the demolition of the cinema, and basically just how everything's kind of falling apart, like her knitting is literally doing.
So, given all those symbols and whatnot, let's go ahead and talk about how the form itself links to the content and how it links to the cultural context of Cinema Paradiso. So, the form links to the content because the times in Italy after World War II were just very simple, to put it in general terms. The lives of many were destroyed, families lost fathers, and there really wasn't much that people of Italy could do. The economies in ruins, and the towns and cities were just in ruins completely. The country was in such bad shape that this form of simplicity is almost perfect. This is evident when looking at the scene with Alfredo getting help on his test from Toto. Obviously, there are problems with the general population's knowledge if these grown men cannot pass tests made for third graders. I believe that the dialogue and choices of shots really connect to this sort of return to simpler time after there was so much conflict in Italy for such a long time. There are obvious divides in class, as demonstrated in the many scenes that involve the theater, but for the most part, these aren't extraordinary tense or loaded scenes. I mean, the interactions that the characters have with one another are just very simple and very to the point. And the fact that he makes this potentially very politically loaded movie just about passion and community is just such a refreshing and unique take on such an exhausted idea.
So while thinking about form, we can actually dive a little deeper and talk about the motifs and imagery in the film. So first of all, Christianity is a very dominant motif in the film, and we see a lot of Christian imagery throughout it as well. Religion was really prominent in Italy at this time, and the Christian Democratic Party was in control, so we see a lot of this in the film. Toto, the main character, is even an altar boy when he's younger, and he works really closely with the priest. And Alfredo actually quotes dialogue from movies, but he says it in this inspiring way that makes you feel as though he's actually reading scripture from the Bible, yet it's movie quotes. And so, in addition, bells ringing is a strong motif in the film that symbolizes moral duty, because whenever they ring, someone is called to do an important thing or an important obligation. Like, for example, Toto rings the bell as an altar boy, and the father even says to him, "If I don't hear the bells, I lose my place," signifying that it's a really important job for him. And also, the bells ring in the town square whenever it's summoning like the citizens to come to mass. And at the end of the film, the morning after Toto hears of Alfredo's death, bells start ringing when he's leaving to return to Italy, which symbolizes his moral duty to return home to see his family and to go to Alfredo's funeral. And another important motif is poverty and the negative effects of World War II that we've already mentioned before, because it's illustrated throughout the entire film just with shots of the rundown town and the struggling citizens, and it's just a really dominant theme like in this movie. And one last important thing to note about the film is the strong emotional imagery that is present. And the film constantly shows people crying, kissing, hugging, laughing. And one of the main relationships in the film is the father-son relationship between Alfredo and Toto, which shows the strong bond of love.
So yeah, it gives you a general idea about the imagery and motifs. So let's dive a little bit more deeper into like analysis of like the text. So Olivia, take it away.
The main narrative technique utilized throughout the movie is the use of flashbacks. The opening scene shows the main character, Toto, as an adult in present time, learning about the death of Alfredo. Then the movie flashes back to when Toto was a child. The majority of the movie is told as a flashback. The flashback is in chronological order with the passage of time sped up to show the stages of Toto's life. Toto and Alfredo's relationship grows throughout the movie. At first, Toto gets on the nerves of Alfredo. He sees him as a troublemaker, but also recognizes Toto's innocent curiosity of filmmaking. As the movie progresses and the plot develops, so does the tone. The tone at the start of the movie is playful and immature, but as Toto and Alfredo start to work together and their relationship grows, the tone becomes more passionate and philosophical. Alfredo passes his knowledge to Toto and soon becomes Toto's father figure. Toto looks up to him and gains an unwavering passion for film.
So let's take a step back from the more analytical points of this and just take a look at some of the judgment that this movie makes. I believe that the text really doesn't make judgments, but when it does, it just relates to the kind of lack of class struggle that really existed within the time, at least for the early parts of the restructuring of Italy in post-World War II. The period was a period in which basically everyone was on the same playing field for the most part. I mean, there were obviously more privileged people in the area, but for the most part, all the people had something in common in this film, which was the love of cinema. The moral system displayed in the film really had not much to do with individuals, but just an entertainment and community. The values that had probably stemmed from Christianity, as the church scenes had many familiar faces from the theater. The only real value judgments that are directly addressed is when Toto leaves for Rome. He didn't visit for such a long time because Alfredo told him not to. And the fact that Alfredo had talked about him so much during his life, and the fact that he deprived himself from Toto because he knew it was a good career choice for him to make, it just shows the value that he had in regards to Toto. And in terms of describing community, it really just represents a community as a whole coming together for something common that really didn't involve too much political change or political understanding, but rather it was just a love for film. There really isn't development other than you see characters here and there get married or they fall in love or something, and there's like funny dynamics between, you know, the ticket owner and the guy who checks the tickets and stuff, but other than that, the roles are really just defined by the main characters themselves and not really minor characters. So, I mean, this class revolves around looking at texts from all over the world. How does this piece compare to some of the pieces that we looked in class? Ed, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so I found a couple similarities and differences between Cinema Paradiso and No One Knows About Persian Cats. First, they're both foreign films portraying media with culture backgrounds. It is well portrayed how media can bring people together, create communities, how they affect people, and how they can convey meanings to people. Also, there are censorship of media. In Cinema Paradiso, movies had to be seen by the priest before it could be played for the people in the public. And whenever there were scenes that were inappropriate to the priest, especially love scenes, he would demand to cut the scene off the movie. In No One Knows About Persian Cats, the government censors films and music. It is a lot stricter than it is in Cinema Paradiso. We see how American movies are banned in Iran and how bands have to play their musics in soundproofed small rooms. The level of censorships were different, but it was interesting to see the parallelism in both movies. There are also differences in two movies. Cinema Paradiso is a coming of age film that focused more on Toto's growth and his relationships, whereas No One Knows About Persian Cats is a docudrama that tries to tell the reality of underground musicians in Tehran to the audiences. We can also see lots of scenes of Ashken's band having to hide in small dark places to practice songs and have concerts in No One Knows About Persian Cats. I thought these scenes show how hopeless they were regarding their dreams. On the other hand, in Cinema Paradiso, there was an open square right in front of the cinema, and most of the time it was bright and sunny. And Toto would look out the window to look at the square, and I thought these scenes connote hopes in Toto's future life.
Why don't you go ahead? We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Just give us some of the overall themes of this film.
Two major themes that I found in this movie were love and escapism. The theme of love is shown during the movie, not just Toto's love for film, but the growing love between Alfredo and Toto that mimics the father-son relationship. Since Toto's real father has been away at war, Toto leans on Alfredo for someone to look up to and someone to confide in. Escapism is another theme demonstrated in the movie. The community, Toto, and Alfredo escape from the harsh realities of war by coming together and entertaining themselves with film.
Thank you, Olivia. We're going to go ahead and on that note, I'm your host, Luis Campos, along with Megan, Edward, and Olivia, and we all wanted to thank you for listening, and just have a good night.